Good evening, everyone, and good morning to our viewers and participants in America. It is with great pleasure to welcome you to this conference, marking the publication of a special issue of the Journal of Holocaust Research in honor of Professor Saul Friedländer on his 90th birthday. My name is Yoav Yaron, and I am the managing editor of the Journal of Holocaust Research. On behalf of the journal's editors and board, I take advantage of this opportunity to send Professor Friedländer our best wishes for many more years of good health and of outstanding scholarship. The Journal of Holocaust Research is a bilingual English and Hebrew publication devoted to the interdisciplinary study of the Holocaust. The journal was established in 2009 by Professor Aryeh Kochavi, and it is edited by Professor Gavriel Rosenfeld, Professor Stefan Erich, and Dr. Michal. The journal is part of the Weizsäcker Center for Holocaust Research and Education at the University of Haifa. Among its many activities, the Weizsäcker Center offers an international multidisciplinary MA program in Holocaust Studies that aims to foster the next generation of Holocaust researchers and educators. I myself am a graduate of this program, along with some 250 students from more than 35 countries across the globe in the past 11 years. Naturally, Professor Friedländer's scholarly work is at the core of the program's curricula, and it should thus come as no surprise that we accepted with enthusiasm the ideal to publish a special issue in his honor. The special issue was directed by 4 prominent scholars who served as guest editors: Professor Dina Porat, Professor Michal Govrin, Professor David Ohana, and Professor Carlo Ginzburg, all of whom will be speaking in this conference. The issue in honor of Professor Friedländer is available for free on our Taylor and Francis website, and viewers on YouTube may find the link in the video description. And now, without further ado, I'm happy to welcome you all again to this conference. Now, unfortunately, Professor Schäfer-Mossensen and Professor Sinnemann are both unable to join us today, and so I'll be reading a short greeting from them, written by Professor Schäfer-Mossensen. Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'm sorry that I cannot be with you at the event in honor of Professor Saul Friedländer, but I'm definitely with you in spirit. At the Tzvi Yavik School of Historical Studies, we're blessed with many happy events and a very lively community. And I confirm my attendance to another event prior to the invitation to this evening conference. I appreciate the opportunity to write a few words nevertheless. History is the study of the past. History is also an understanding of how the present developed out of multiple futures that were possible, who are in a constant dialogue with the past. At the School of Historical Studies, we consider this dialogue in its very important role to remember and remind the founding fathers and mothers of the field in general, and here in Tau in particular. We would not be what we are today, an excellent community of historians. And even if I'm somewhat biased when I say so, I believe that the evidence is sound. If it were not for the giants who are models for groundbreaking and committed historians. And all of this is of course relevant to Professor Friedländer. I'm glad that the school could contribute to the special issue dedicated to Professor Friedländer and the event in his honor as a token of our appreciation and gratitude. Professor Friedländer is, of course, a model in his pioneering research on Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, and in fact the historical toolkit as a whole. And if I may, Professor Friedländer is an inspiration also in his unflagging and ongoing commitment to the historian's trade. Especially at this time and in this place, where there are tangible threats to democracy and liberal values, it is crucial to be sensitive to the lessons of the past, certainly a relevant past, and the past that is used and misused, such as in Europe in the 1930s and early 1940s. Heartfelt good wishes to Professor Friedländer on his 90th birthday, and many thanks to all who brought this special issue and the event to fruition. Thank you, Professor Schäfer-Mossensen and Professor Sinnemann for their kind wishes, and I would now like to invite Professor Gavriel Rosenfeld, editor of the Journal of Holocaust Research. Gavriel? Okay, I see that Gavriel Rosenfeld, Professor Rosenfeld is not online, so I'll be moving on, and I invite Professor Dina Porat, guest editor of the special issue, or Professor Friedländer.
thank you all who are listening and watching by the Zoom. That's some 80 participants registered, so it's quite an event. Those who thought about it, organized, brought it to fruition, are really happy that this event is coming up. We are very happy that the Festschrift, the collection of essays written by colleagues to whom we applied, is really already online. And not only online, we got word today that it is in print, just arrived, hot from the press, and will be there in the few coming days. I would like to begin with a few words of thanks, of course. First of all, to the publication house, to the Journal of Holocaust Research in Haifa University. You heard about it and about its activities. It was a very good match, a very fruitful match. I would like to thank very much Professor Kochavi, who embraced the idea of having a special issue in honor of Professor Saul Friedländer on the occasion of his 90th birthday, and to Gavriel Rosenfeld, who is a chief editor now. Both of them are pulling the wagon up the hill. Special thanks go to Yoav Yaron, who modestly did not really tell you about his crucial task in this endeavor. He was efficient and kind, and I can tell you that in less than a year, we had the Festschrift ready, and all of you who come from the academic field and sphere know very well that this is not done often. So, Yoav, it was a pleasure. It was as well a pleasure to work with Professor Ohana, who is here with us, with Michal Govrin, and first of all with Professor Carlo Ginzburg. We both started the idea long before we had a match with this journal, and I really thank you, we all thank you very much. Warm thanks go also to all the contributors who sent us their essays on time, original essays, and together the result is a festschrift of original works done by the best of researchers in the field, as we said, in honor of Saul Friedländer, who is, of course, the one to thank. After all this list of things, thank you, Saul. Thank you for the many books that you have written, the many books we had the privilege of reading and studying from, on teaching for many years, not only in Tel Aviv University, in Hebrew University, in other places, and in all of them, educating young generations, new generations of researchers, students who became researchers and scholars themselves. We'd like to thank you for being a man of principles, principles from which he did not deviate for many years. Remember, no matter what is your political opinion, but we remember, or our political opinion, we remember how he went to protest against establishing a new settlement, one of the very first ones near Har Bracha, on the very day that he got the Israel Prize. And he did it risking coming late to the ceremony of getting the Israel Prize, but he did. We definitely remember how he left the house, the home of Ernst Nolte, who invited him to dinner, but then spoke in a horrible manner against the Jewish people, claiming the Jews in fact were the first one to attack Germany on the eve of World War II, and thus being blamed themselves. And he got up, ordered the cab, and left the place. We certainly remember his debate, a 3 letters from each side debate with Martin Borchardt. Borchardt claimed that survivors, as survivors, cannot be neutral or objective researchers or scholars of the Holocaust. And of course, the debate was hot and fruitful because it was published all over. And the result was that, of course, they can. He not only enriched us with research, with historical research, but I think that it's another point to be remembered that his love of literature, of the belle art, is deep and encompassing one, and he wrote a lot, especially about Kafka, a book, a few articles, and I think we should thank him for that as well, for expanding his view and letting us follow him into more fields and more insights. I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to wish all of us to have many more happy events in which you would all meet each other, eat alfajores, and be together and hope for better times. All the best, and thanks again.
Thank you, Professor Porat. Moving on, how did Saul Friedländer become a historian? To answer this question, we will now watch a segment from Frank Damon's film, When Memory Comes, a film about Saul Friedländer.
So how did you become a historian? That is to start in the center.
Indirectly, very indirectly. I had no love of history as a high school student. I had no need or desire to ever become a historian. And it's true for my years, let's say, in upper classes in high school in Paris, where I remember very well the history lessons on French history, of course, and didn't like it. I wasn't good either. And then in Israel, Jewish history, when I finished high school, didn't speak to me in the least. And then years went by, army and so on. And when I came back to Paris to study in the early 50s, I studied political science. I was at the Institut d'études politiques in Paris and worked at the Israeli embassy for my upkeep. And so I never thought of becoming a historian. Then I worked for years with Nahum Goldman, Shimon Peres, and so on. And when I came back to my doctoral studies in the very early 60s, 61 actually, in Geneva, my PhD was in political science, but I had chosen a historical topic, that is history, let's say, of international relations. And strangely enough, without being aware of it, I chose something, a topic which had to do with Nazi Germany, not with the Jews though, the American factor in German foreign and military policy between 1939, the beginning of the war, and 1941, when the United States entered the war. The question I was asking was, how did the idea, the perspective or not, of the US entering the war influenced Hitler's strategic thinking and the military decisions from up to down in Germany. I think the word Jew didn't even appear in, maybe I am pushing it too far because, of course, Jewish Roosevelt and so on, in Hitler's eyes, played a role. But again, I still was intent on being a political scientist and actually eventually going into practical work in diplomacy or something like that. So I really am not born a historian, nor did I aspire to become a historian. But the past was pushing me without my really being aware that I was being pushed by the past. And when I was sitting in Bonn in the archives of the Foreign Ministry for this work on Hitler and the United States, I discovered a document which had been misplaced. In the file US Inlandswoge Vereinigte Staaten, I found a document, again misplaced, which told of a German diplomatic document telling of an invitation by Pope Pius XII to the intendant of the Berlin Opera, who was coming to Rome for whatever concert, to maybe he invited the orchestra, or part of it, of course, to come to his papal apartments to perform scenes out of Parsifal. It was December 41. And so I found this absolutely strange, not to say shocking, that the Pope could invite the Berlin Opera to perform Parsifal in his apartments in December 1941, when all the horror of the Eastern Front was already known, in part at least, in Rome as well. And that led me to come back to Bonn after finishing my PhD on the topic I mentioned, and to ask for the Vatican documents. And
what at that time? So
we are now in 1963.
No, but at the time in 1941, what was it exactly that the Vatican at that moment knew about?
They knew about the shooting, the mass execution of Jews on occupied Soviet territory. That is the notorious Einsatzgruppen operations, killing thousands and thousands, actually within the 6 months between the German attack on the Soviet Union in June 41 and the end of the year. There were some 700,000 Jews killed, murdered by the Einsatzgruppen. And this was in part known at the Vatican because of various people they had in Eastern Poland, which was partner of those of this murderous campaign. It had been occupied by the Soviets between 1939 and 1941, so it was liberated Soviet territory by the Germans, right? And in Poland, of course, there were a lot of emissaries of the Vatican informing of what was going on Eastern Polish territory and the general government also. And then many messages came from the Ukraine and so on. So that we know that there was good knowledge, if maybe not complete knowledge, but good knowledge at the Vatican about what was going on in the Eastern territories under German occupation. But all in all, the persecutions were known. the hunt for the Jews was known. So
at that time also things happened with priests in Poland.
And priests in Poland, and the mentally ill in Germany, right? The killing of the mentally ill. So things were pretty clear about the murderous dimension of the regime, particularly after the beginning of the war. So the invitation to the Berlin Opera, which I'm sure was also had its artistic reasons. I'm not saying this was purely a political act, but I'm sure that the Pope was aware of the political dimension of an initiative of that kind, which, by the way, it never took place, the concert. It was cancelled then. I don't know, or nobody knows by whom, but it didn't take place. So, but still, you ask me, how did I become a historian? This, in a way, led me to come back to Bonn, to ask for the Vatican files. And as I was preparing then the documentation, which became a book, Pius XII and the Third Reich, in 1964, I felt that here I was suddenly doing something which fitted my, how could I say, this was fitting to me much more than political science, much more than my previous inquiries. I was suddenly dans mon élément, you would say in French. And I realized, of course, it didn't demand much introspection to understand that actually my past was coming back, that I had spent the war from 42 to the end and a little beyond the end in a Catholic seminary. I had been baptized and was firm Catholic during the war years as a kid of 10 to 13, 14. And so this topic of the church and the Third Reich was exactly, and the Jews, was exactly what was the core of my being at that time. And from then on, it became for me, I mean, I started writing on those topics from various angles, but by now I had found my way. So that's why I said indirectly. I really had no passion for history as a youngster, nor any interest, major interest, over the early years of adulthood. And then, for some reason, I chose a kind of historical approach to the Third Reich, which was already closed, for my dissertation, but still not aware that I was really coming back slowly to my own existential, in a way, framework. And then with the Pope, with this incident and with the book on the Vatican, I suddenly was back dans mon élément.
How would you summarize what were your conclusions in that book, really?
About the Pope?
Yep.
At that time, the book came out in 1964, which, by the way, was in the midst of the Rolf Hochhuth controversy. Rolf Hochhuth was a German playwright, indeed, and had written a play which became a worldwide sensation, Le Vicaire, der Stellvertreter in German, about Pope Pius XII and his inaction, let's put it that way, during the extermination of the Jews of Europe, and specifically the deportation of the Jews of Rome in 1943. So I didn't know of the play when I was assembling my material, and I never met Hochhuth personally, but we spoke on the phone a year or two later. So, but my book came out in this controversy. By then I was aware of the controversy, And so it created a lot of positive and negative reactions, also positive, and also from Catholic priests or even Cardinal Tisserand, who wrote to me a letter published in the meantime saying it's good that the truth be known and so on. The conclusions were that as a political institution, the calculations of the Vatican could be seen from a political angle as ultimately unacceptable, but acceptable in the context of the fear of Bolshevism and the need to do everything to support the forces that would fight the oncoming Bolshevik threat, mainly after Stalingrad. From a spiritual viewpoint, there was a lapse, or at least it looked like a lapse for a personality, the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, who by his definition of his own role, and I don't speak of Pius XII now, but of the papacy of the Pope, was a representative of the highest moral force in the world, right? That was his whole, his self-definition. And on that count, the silence in the face of such abomination, which certainly was well known in 1943 when the Jews of Rome were deported, was a lapse which would remain as a kind of deep shadow on the history of the church.
Gavriel, if you can unmute yourself. Can we hear you? Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Great. The floor is yours.
So I'm really, really pleased to be involved in today's celebration of Saul's magnificent career. Saul and I have known each other for more than 30 years, ever since I began my course of graduate study with him at UCLA, all the way back in the year 1990. And I'm happy to say that Saul and I both were able to see each other this past May in New York City, when I was privileged to give him a Lifetime Achievement Award on behalf of the Center for Jewish History, where I'm currently sitting at the moment, now as president. Back then, I was still a professor at Fairfield University, where I remain, but I'm currently on leave. In any case, at the Center for Jewish History last May, I surveyed Saul's career for a very large audience and conducted a 10-minute conversation with him about the relevance of Holocaust studies to the present political moment. And I certainly don't want to repeat myself today in my brief welcome remarks. However, I would like to say that for myself, and I imagine innumerable other scholars, we are all indebted to Saul for inspiring so many of us to engage in the study of historical memory. The growth of memory studies since the late 1980s, and especially since the turn of the millennium, is in no small part due to Saul's seminal texts, When Memory Comes, and Reflections of Nazism, an essay on kitchen death. These were the texts, at least for me, that inspired me to study with Saul in the early 1990s, and they're always in my mind whenever I approach new topics dealing with how the past takes shape in human consciousness. Today, the study of memory has never been more important, as we can see from the history wars and the culture wars that are currently raging all across the world. And so what I'd like to at least conclude with is a short observation, which is that as we navigate these treacherous times as historians and as scholars in multiple departments, we should all be grateful to Saul for helping us understand how the past can become transfigured in the present, and how we as scholars can offer clarity when all too many partisans want to muddy the historical waters. So again, to Saul, Mazal Tov on your 90th birthday, on a lifetime of tremendous scholarly achievements. I'm always indebted to you for inspiration and scholarly wisdom.
Moving on, I'd like to invite Professor David Ohana for his lecture entitled The Reconstruction of Memory in the Writing of Saul Friedländer. And responding to the lecture are Professor Michal Govrin and Professor Carlo Ginzburg. All three served as guest editors in this special issue.
I would like to begin by reading a passage from a book I wrote on Albert Camus, in which I summarize his reflections of the annihilation of a village in Czech by the Nazis. After Heydrich was killed in the Operation Anthropoid on June 42, the Nazis ordered the destruction of the village. Lidice, of course. Camus saw the destruction of Lidice by the Nazis as the first attempt in history to found a church on negation. The houses of the village were burned down. The men were shot, the women banished, the children reared in the religion of the Führer. Spatial regulations were enforced and months were devoted to raising the area by dynamic clearing away stones, sealing reservoir with dirt, changing the road and diverting the course of a river. Finally, Lidice became nothing but the future. The cemeteries were cleared of the bones of the dead. Nothing had existed before in this place. When I heard Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli Minister of Treasury, calling for annihilation of Hawara, the Palestinian village in the occupied territories, it reminded me of the annihilation of Czech village described by Camus. It brought to my mind my essay on the restorative memory in the writings of Saul Friedländer. "70 years after the war, Friedländer reflected on the dialectical logic of memory, personal memory, collective memory, and how memory comes alive and its re-experience from the one generation to the next. It was clear that the boundaries of the academic discourse on memory needed to expand and tap into the deepest elements of personal memories. Memory is a subject that has been explored from diverse perspectives by individual and psychologists such as Nietzsche and Freud, as well as sociologists and historians such as Maurice Alfred and Pierre Nora, of course. As a historian, Friedländer work rely on the knowledge of facts. In his autobiography, When Memory Comes from 1979, he quotes Gustav Mehring, an Austrian writer who lived in Prague and wrote The Golem in 1914. When knowledge comes, memory comes too. Little by little, knowledge and memory are one and the same thing. In another work, I illuminated the concept of memoria from a perspective of historical figures like Bar Kokhba, Herod, or Nimrod, whose narratives of memory, commemoration, and self-image change over the years. The theoretical term I coined for this phenomenon is restorative memory, which describes the functional adjustment of frequently changing plasticity of memory that essentially inflects our attitude towards our past. This is especially evident when details and events related to our past are reconstructed and adapted to the current situations of our private and public lives, adapted to serve specific contemporary political, social, and educational goals. The selective reconstruction of biographic and collective events occurs through emphasis, deletion, rejection, addition, or elimination of relevant details. The needs of the present result in the reconstruction of the past and the attribution of a new meaning to events that, according to Thomas Mann, the term historiology refers to the objective study of history to obtain scientific knowledge. However, the concept of restorative memory refers to the reconstruction of past events to shape the present. History is fleeting, whereas restorative memory persists. The childhood memories recounted by Friedländer in his work When Memory Comes, beginning in 1932. The year he was born to an assimilated Jewish family in Prague, a place he described as a lost Garden of Eden, from which he was exiled at the worst possible moment. He then described his wartime experiences in France, where he changed his name to Paul Henri Marie Friedland, converted to Christianity, was adopted by another father as a child with those of the French symbols of Virgin, was adopted by another family and replaced the stories of the heroic of the Maccabees he had heard from his father as a child with those of the French symbols like Virgin and Pétain. His account ends with the story of his immigration to Israel in 1948 on the ill-fated Altalena, the cargo ship of the right-wing Irgun. He had joined the Irgun's youth movement Beitar, despite his communist beliefs. However, the resulting ideological tension and contradictions did not end with the fulfillment of the Zionist dream and the establishment of the State of Israel. As an adult, he continued to wander between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and between Geneva and Los Angeles. While hiding in France, he found refuge from the parents' tragic deportation to Auschwitz death camp. It was there where he first learned about Auschwitz from a Jesuit priest, an encounter which thereby evoked a Friedländer Jewish identity. I wrote some passage. And so, in front of this obscure Christ, I listened Auschwitz, the trains, the gas chambers, the crematory ovens, the millions of dead. For the first time, I felt myself to be a Jewish, no longer despite myself, but through a sensation of absolute loyalty. It is true that I knew nothing of Judaism and was still a Catholic, But something had changed. A tie had been reestablished. An identity was emerging, a confused one certainly. But from that day forward, there could be no doubt in some manner or other I was Jewish, whatever this term meant in my mind. Like many assimilated German-speaking Jews before World War II, Friedländer's parents felt more German than Jewish. In Prague he was called Paul, and in Vichy, France, he became Paul once again. His Jewish religion played no role in his life, and Catholicism represented the heaven that had saved him from the horrified fate of his parents. The story of his parents' death in Auschwitz remained obscure, and his childhood memories soon began to fade as well. As a result, his attempts to regain his Jewish identity were limited by his Catholic sensitivities. In post-war Paris, Friedländer started to pray, don tefillin, and envision the land of Israel and the Jewish state based on the photos he had saved from his childhood home. This image of a glorious future was illustrated once again as he sat near a bonfire with other young men, listening as their youth leader explained that the passive victimization of the Jewish people was made possible because no matter where they went, they never truly had home. But this was over and done with, he said. We would never go to the slaughter like a herd of sheep again. And in order to bring this about, we needed a state. When the new state was unable to resolve Friedländer's frequent identity crisis, he searched his memory in an attempt to understand how he had managed to change his identity 4 times, his religion twice, and his name 5 times over the courses of decades. His struggle to determine which of his 5 names was his really one is proof that his hesitation and deliberation were true reflection of his deep sense of uncertainty about his identity. He rediscovered the Hebrew Bible in the Ben Shemen Agricultural School, and at the same time spent much of his time trying to restore his memory of Paris metro routes. His childhood memories were gradually restored as he documented the history of the Jewish people during the Holocaust and set out on a quest through the labyrinth of his own personal memories. He discovered that memory is not equivalent to history, and the segments of his memory do not necessarily coincide with historical fact. Instead, memory is a raw material that requires interpretation, context, and processing. Memory reflects the fragmentary and deeply personal nature of an experience and of a passive aspect of personal event. It does not offer a complete picture, but rather segments, signs, and indicators that emerge from the rules and become visible to the naked eye, concealing endless life experience. If these memories are not documented, they disappear into the embrace of oblivion. Friedländer tries to use these memories to heal the deep void in his soul that threatened to destroy his life. There are three things that a historian has to remember, said by esteemed teacher, the historian Yaakov Talmon. One is dates, second is places, and third, I forgot. What he meant was that there is much more beyond the banal details, and that it is the insights derived that are most important. However, exploring this insight in depth leads to the conclusion that restorative memory reflects the dialectics of remembering and forgetting, as forgetting is an integral part of the process of remembering. When drafting biographical or historical reconstructions, we decide which details, facts, and events are best forgotten. Friedländer made a reference to the provocative article by Yehuda Elkanah called The Need to Forget. Although Friedländer understood Elkanah's logic and the two shared similar political opinions, Friedländer disagreed with the pivotal argument of the article, which highlighted the need to uproot the importance of historical remembrance on our lives. Friedländer presented a more complex perspective on the balance between remembering and forgetting, as reflected by the concept of restorative memory, knowing what to remember, but also remembering what to forget. Witnesses and survivors, Jorge Sabun and Elie Wiesel, also talked about remembering and forgetting about testimony and the last witness. Elie Wiesel: I was always afraid of losing the memory. I know that memory is vulnerable. Are there things I have forgotten? Are there faces that I can no longer see? Jorge Sabun: something strange happened to me when it comes to memory and the fear of forgetting. The more I write, the more memories are evoked. Forgetting was a form of therapy that was soothing for a certain period in time. Elie Wiesel: if the Greeks invented tragedy, the Romans the epistle, and the Renaissance the sonnet, then our generation invented a new literature, that of testimony. Friedländer discussed the importance of testimony in his introduction to his book, The Years of Extermination, Germany and the Jews, 1939-1945. He wrote that the personal stories of the destruction of European Jewry can be reconstructed from the memories of the victims, not only based on their official post-war testimonies in court statements, interviews, and memories, but also on the many journals and letters written by Jews of different ages and from different countries, which better reflect the diversity of Jewish society. There is no way of knowing whether these individuals wrote their memories at the beginning of the war in order to document the historical events they were witnessing, but it is clear that as the war continued and the persecution increased, they realized the importance of their role as recorded and commentators of their own personal fates and the events of their times. Friedländer's process of remembrance emerged at different levels in various stages of his writing as a historian, a writer of memories, and a cultural critic. As a historian, he was sensitive to changing cultural patterns and noted the mutual representations of Nazism in Germany and in Western Europe. A strange sort of counter-memory of the Third Reich was appearing in Germany. It was dubbed by Hitler wave, the Hitler Welle. In France, the retro fashion, la mode retro. In Italy, something else. This strange phenomenon caught his eye and inspired him to write Reflections of Nazism, an essay on kitsch and death in 1983. Friedländer claimed that the Nazi era had drawn public attention, as is reflected in the moral relativism and postmodern aesthetics in work such as Memories of Albert Speer, the biography of Hitler by Joachim Fes, the film Our Hitler, a film from Germany by Hans-Jürgen Sieberg, and the film The Night Porter by Liliana Cavani. Friedländer identified the mindless and the fascination associated with his approach and perceived the new representation as a playful free-for-all beyond good and evil. It is not surprising that he chose this well-known term coined by Nietzsche. Traditional ethics were replaced with a new form of aesthetics. Even in the 30s, many intellectuals referred to the authentic element of National Socialism in artistic terms as a national enterprise or of self-creation. In the 80s, Friedländer engaged in a long argument with German historians about the historization of National Socialism, in which he quoted the German historian Martin Borchardt, who had attributed mythological memory to the Jewish victims who had survived. Borchardt claimed that the annihilation of the Jewish people was possible only because the actions were concealed and carried out by a minority. In the 80s, Borchardt blamed distorted historical writing on modern historians who were forced to emigrate after 1933 for racist or political reasons. The end of citation. And I would like to ask him, I asked him, and what happened, I would like to ask him to be the race of Franz Newman, Eva Reichmann, Hannah Arendt, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Ernst Fraenkel, and Raoul Hilberg. What Borchardt meant was that the subjective victims, the Jews, had distorted reality in the mythological memory they had created. When Borchardt expressed this thought at the Center for European Studies at Harvard University in 1988, he was confronted by a young postdoctoral student who said, "Are you a German historian capable of being an objective historian?" It's important to remember that Borchardt was a member of the Nazi Party. In a letter to Friedländer, Borchardt finally admitted to having been a member of Hitlerjugend, but refused to take responsibility. The arguments voiced publicly by Ernst Nolte were that the Holocaust was the so-called destruction of the Jews and later imitation of the Soviet class warfare. In addition, Hitler's invasion was a defensive action taken against communist aggression and international Jewish conspiracies. Someone should have responded to Nolte's argument, which were based on the restorative memory of the conservative and national camps in Germany. Indeed, historic Streit was a response to Nolte. Friedländer admitted that his argument with German historians led to his decision to write two large and monumental to say at the least, volumes about Nazi Germany and Jewish people. His work is unique as it combines subjective testimonies given by the Jewish people, given by the victims, with documentation and analysis of objective processes. In his introduction, he noted that for the historians after him, like most of humanity, the Third Reich, World War II, and the fate of European Jewry are not shared memories. Friedländer concluded, for my generation, living with the memories of the past and contemporary perceptions may create a disturbing dissonance. However, it can also produce insights that would not have otherwise emerged. What is the universal message of the Holocaust? The destruction of the idea of universalism was the basis for Nazi ideology. The Nazis accused the Jews of spreading conspiracies ranging from the equality of all humans as portrayed in the Ten Commandments to the enlightened ideas of the 18th century, which attempted to claim the existence of a single human family. According to the Nazis, it was for these reasons why the conspirators had to be eliminated from the cycle of humanity. The concept of society and human solidarity that were invented by the enlightened were replaced with concept of animal nature and Darwinist brutality. The personal restorative memory of Saul Friedländer was translated into his life work of documenting the Jewish Holocaust of the 20th century, countering the restorative memory of German revisionist historians, the banality of memory, forgetting and formation of memory. In Friedlander's research and personal testimonies, he presented impressive historiography that addressed issues related to aesthetics, biography, literary and cultural criticism, archives, theoretical interpretation, and the broader historical context. His extensive work has made him one of the leading historians of modern times and a guardian of the Enlightenment. I would like to just a second, please. I wanted to finish with one sentence, the punchline, but the punchline was punch me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ohana. Moving on, I'd like to invite Professor Michal Govrin, who is speaking to us over Zoom. Michal, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, and I wanted to start the evening by a series of thanks. Thanks for putting this conference together. Thanks to the wonderful collaboration of editors and to all the contributors of the special issue with a wonderful cover of Michal Rovner, who the artist, the only non-historian as I am among all the historians, humanist historians in this issue, and that her wonderful cover is on the front piece of the issue. And especially I wanted to thank Saul Friedländer for a lifelong inspiration and the challenge that his work and his personality offered to me. As a writer, I would stress tonight not only his monumental contribution to the knowledge of facts and history, but also his rare awareness and acuteness about what is the meaning of writing history, what is between the histoire and histoire, as we say in French, and the historian as a storyteller, and the power of the poetics of saying the history to construct a narrative, a myth, information, and to change society. When I invited Saul Friedländer to give what is now the opening piece of the issue, a guest lecture at the Van Leer Institute, in the scope of the research group which I led, which I led for 4 years at the Van Leer Institute, transmitted memory and fiction, I knew that his contribution and his words will be leading for us. And actually, his minute analysis of the gap between personal memory and collective memory, the mythical dimension of collective memory, and the way the present shapes the past in the needs, the social needs of the present time of a society, were cornerstones for our work. And I would say they were prophetic to what we live now and the manipulation of history and as it changes. And he's reading first of a distant example of the French history and the shaping of the memory of the La Grande Guerre of the First World War, and then very quickly going into the Israeli memory and how it changed every almost 10 years according to the circumstances, still haunts us in the way the memory of the Holocaust, the memory of the Shoah, haunts the Israeli society, both consciously and unconsciously. In the very moving session the next morning between Saul Friedländer and the late Dov Kulka, Otto Kulka, the insights were very deep, more both personally and on a historical history, and you can find them transcribed at the volume, But There Was Love, Shaping the Memory of the Holocaust, an anthology of the work of the research group that I hopefully will soon be also in English and not only in Hebrew. But by inviting Shaul to Jerusalem, I had also a private hidden reason. And it wasn't only the fact that I happened to know and have the privilege to know Saul Friedländer since the age of 7, when I was a child with music scores going to have piano lessons, but further on as a doctoral student in Paris, coming to Jerusalem and meeting with Saul Friedländer, who showed me Meyer's The Golem, saying that is a must read, where I understood the power of myth and the power of mythical figures in the psyche. Or when at the same time, soon after, I read When Memory Comes, which became not only an inspiration, but also, I would say, a call with a capital C to my writing career. But even more so, what Saul Friedlander's inspiration was, it happened on the poetical level as I started my short reply today. It was in the awareness that the mode of writing, the poetics of writings changes or gives creates the exact effect in the reader. It might be a historical book, which is written as a data and banalizes effects by stressing them as a normality, as something which is within discourse, doesn't tear the discourse. But it can also be with the awareness of how ideas fascinate us, or as he calls that in his book that has already mentioned 3 times tonight, Reflections on Nazism, and the subtitle about kitsch and death. What is the frisson? What is the kind of an unavoidable effect that something has on us, and the power of fascination? And how do you struggle with that? How do you decompose it? From that point of view, I mean, and the lingering effect of that frisson in the culture that we have today, these things, this book was written much before we had the social media, and where kitsch and death collide daily and overwhelm us with information that it is almost difficult to swim among them and see something else. I will just briefly say that for years I've just finished writing a very big book called, a novel called Mother's Silence, and in which, according to the call of Saul Friedländer, I try to give the private voice in the middle of the events, through minor events in the life of my mother, somehow similar to Michal Rovner's work at Yad Vashem, or at the Auschwitz pavilion of Yad Vashem, in the pavilion of Yad Vashem in Auschwitz, how to give the voice to the individual. That's the role of the writer, if you want, but at the same time place this individual voice in the midst of the general events that would not have happened if they were not for the collective identity. They were not aimed at the personal. The personal was erased immediately, being named the Jew, as we can see, for example, in the unforgettable inventory that Stefan Zweig does at the end of the World of Yesterday, where he makes this list of all the contrasts of all those Jews who never spoke to each other that suddenly found themselves together with the same title. The book, the monumental book of Saul Friedländer about the Jews and German and Nazi Germany was on my table all the time, but not only for the data, and not only for the scope of juxtaposing events in so many places of Europe and in the world at the same time, but it was also precisely there because of its poetics. It's the deliberate decision of Saul Friedländer to cut the historian discourse with personal diaries, with personal words written at the real time that shake us, that create a frisson, of truth and of humanity, and not a frisson of the awe and fascination of death and apocalypse. So this technique, I would say, if I can speak from the backstage of the desk, that was part of the inspiration which I really am embedded to Saul Friedländer. But go back to the group that I led. There, the mission was to try to offer a mode of commemoration after the voices of the witnesses will not be with us anymore. What are we going to give to the future? How to create, yes, a myth. But are there genres of different myths? Can we go into the realm of myth and look with a microscope into it and and define differences between cultures and their myths and or the modes of commemorating and memory? That was an open question for the group. One of the notions, and I'll come to that in a moment, one of the notions which also I learned a lot from Saul Friedländer with his courage of addressing it is the place of evil, the place of evil in mankind and the wrongdoing. In his book of Reflection of Nazism, the fascination of the power of evil is part of this frisson and this kitsch. How are we going to deal with that? Actually, that is the last sentence, the opening question with which Saul Friedländer ends this opening piece of our joint book. What to do with evil? That was a question that haunted me, and I will not go into the whole history of it. When I had to deal with that, for example, and from my theatrical point of view and background, I could represent Amon Get, the commander and creator of the camp of Plaszow, as a genius metteur en scène, as a genius director, constructing this whole camp as a stage for him standing on his balcony and shooting at random someone and taking pleasure from the torture events going under his balcony and inviting his guests to see them. The theatrical aspect, the apotheosis of destruction, the apotheosis of, if you want, the Museum of Auschwitz that shows these dimensions. But how to deal with that? Can we eliminate it from our myth? Can we be, totally innocent? How to deal with evil? And here I drew my answers from the Jewish tradition, and especially from the Kabbalah, and especially from the Zohar. And I could say that there are modes and genres of defining evil as well. The Zohar, in that sense, and the Jewish tradition does not eliminate evil. It recognizes it as part of divinity. It recognizes as a necessity in the world, but at the same time, as Sholem would say, or as Tishby, the great scholars and their followers, there is in the world, evil exists as a power, but also at the same time, there is freedom for mankind to struggle with it, to dominate it. It will exist, but how do we address it? And from that point of view, we can see, for example, the writings of the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic rabbi, the rabbi of Piaseczna, that were found under the rubble of the ghetto of Warsaw, where he discusses with God, who is hiding himself behind the face of the power of evil and cannot react, and the role that humans have at that moment at the ghetto of Warsaw, in these extreme moments before the extermination, how to deal with it. So, seeing that evil is there, how do we write a myth, and can we run away from the attraction of kitsch and death, and how to do that? Once again, we went into the Jewish tradition to look about its role, and with a writing team, we could write a proposal for a ritual called the Hitkansut, which is inspired by the memory of the Exodus of Egypt. I'll say it very quickly. Evil is just crumbs of bread or a little bit of a symbol of bitter herbs. But the main way, and the memory is both personal and collective. It's an open forum that changes that contain the changing history. But what I would stress today with the events that take place now in Israel is that the memory of Egypt is a constructive and operative form of memory and not a passive one. It recognizes that slavery will stay with us in the world. So memory has to be a dynamic way of struggling constantly with it. At the Seder of Pesach, we say, now we are slaves. Next year we will be free. And the whole process is to ask what is slavery and who are the dominant forces that enslave us today, either psychologically or physically. With that, the invention of the Sabbath, of Shabbat, as a taste, existential taste of freedom that breaks economy, that gives us freedom now. And above all, the set of laws, the social laws that the Torah gives us, that all start with the saying, let's remember that we were slaves in Egypt. And because of that, the laws that addressed to the slaves in the society, to the foreign, to the non-Jews that are in the society, what would be the justice? How shall we, from that experience, forge our present and future? As they say every Shabbat, the Hebrew memory is both zachor and both shamor. It's both to remember and to act. How do you do both things? Let me just tell you that the Hitkasut has been translated by now to Russian, French, and English. We could have done with a whole seminar on the difference of what the Shoah is, the memory of the Shoah in each place, changing place. And it's extraordinary how history and the memory has so many ramifications as we are now at the moment of the struggle about what the narrative is, what the memory is. That's the struggle in which we are now. And I can share you that when the American team was preparing the Hitkasut in English, in the middle of the Hitkasut, where the main memory that we placed was keeping the face, the dignity of the person, the human face, in front of the erasing of the human, of each human face, and addressing the people who remember to tell their own stories, their origins, to share these memories, and then to understand what is our role in the present. But in the middle, just before it, there is a chapter about evil, where the words of Saul Friedländer are quoted from his book, Reflection on Nazism. When it was translated to American, to English, by the team in America, they could not cope with this chapter. They did not understand the memory of the Holocaust is of suffering. How can we remember evil? And they came all again and again to speak about Nazi evil. And me as an Israeli said, no, we as a nation now in Israel are also victims to the danger of committing evil. And we should take responsibility of it. And that's part of the legacy. And luckily, I had behind me the Jewish wisdom and the Jewish Kabbalah to show me that evil is in each person's heart, and we have to combat it. I have a very short time to speak, and I just wanted to say that Saul Friedländer's work is for me on a level both of a constant lesson, but also of an open call that, like the Haggadah of Pesach, it changes meaning as the epochs and the periods and the times change. And it reflects each time anew as a call for humanity, for courage, for demystification of powers that fascinate us and enslave us, either in the concentration camps or in daily lives and in politics. And I wish Saul many, many more years of strength and vitality, and being able to answer the mail immediately with such vitality, and with all the depth of my gratitude for your oeuvre and for your person, and best wishes and mazel tov. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Govrin. Moving on, I'd like to invite Professor Carlo Ginzburg, another guest editor of this special issue, to address Professor David Ohana's comments.
It's a great honor, it's a privilege to be here, and I'm very grateful for this invitation. I first met Saul Friedländer in 1988 when I started teaching at UCLA. We have been colleagues for many years. We quickly became close friends, and I greatly miss our conversations. Well, what can I do? I can start again. Should I start again? It's a great honor. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm very grateful for this invitation. I first met Saul Friedländer in 1988 when I started teaching at UCLA. We have been colleagues for many years. We quickly became close friends, and I greatly miss our conversations. Dearest Shaul, it's a joy to see you, although from a distance. To participate in this event and to celebrate your achievements, it's a great honor. I read the contributions to this issue of the Journal of Holocaust Studies, and I was struck by the fact that many of them, including my own, focused on the role played in your narrative by diaries and letters of the victims as a distinctive feature of your work. In the introduction to the Years of Extermination, you duly stressed their importance, comparing them to, quote, lightning flashes that illuminate parts of a landscape, end of quote. As you pointed out, those, quote, individual voices can tear through seamless interpretation and pierce the most involuntary smugness of scholarly detachment and, quote unquote, objectivity, end of quote. Undoubtedly, those voices lead your reader towards a deeper objectivity, without quotation marks, unfolding the implications of your integrated history. Saul Friedländer has been, for me, as well as for many, many people, a model and an inspiration. As a historian and as a human being, je te remercie, Shaul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ginzburg, and all the other guest editors. I must say it's been a pleasure to work with you all. However challenging, for 15 contributors for one issue is a bit unusual. But thank you all for your cooperation and contribution. Lastly, concluding this conference, I'd like to invite our guest of honor, Professor Saul Friedländer, for his final comments. Monsieur le Professeur, la parole est à vous. If you could please unmute yourself.
Friends, good evening. I want to thank all of you for being here on Zoom or personally, and in particular those who spoke so kindly of my work. I want to thank in particular those who contributed to the Festschrift and prepared this event. Friends and of long years, usually. Professors Michal Govrin, Carlo Ginzburg, David Ohana, Gav Rosenfeld, and especially you, Dina, dear Dina, Professor Dina Porat, for being the prime mover and designer of this whole project. Now, with your permission, I will say a few words, not about my work though, but about what's on the minds of all of us. I hesitated to do that, but I was not only authorized, but encouraged by the organizers to do so. And David Ohana, Michal Govrin gave a hint in a way. So let me spend a few minutes on what's going on. It's easy, doubt enough, when ensconced in California. Yet Ohana and I can think of little else. We scrutinize the daily news, dissect them, we chew, we digest, and more often than not, we vomit. It reminds me of the German film, Der Teufelsgeneral, in which famously disenchanted Nazi pilot Ernst Udet, acted by Kurt Jürgens, declared, "I can't even eat as much as I would like to vomit." For some reason, this sentence has remained with me for decades, and here it is, handy again in the present circumstances. Incidentally, Ernst Udet committed suicide in 1941. The date for today's event depended eventually on the availability of space, Gilman, on a given evening also, I guess. But it could also have been determined by the date as such. I don't know how many of you have thought of this, but March 22nd is the eve of the day on which 90 years ago exactly, on March 23, 1933, the Weimar Republic was formally overthrown by a Reichstag majority, and Hitler received full powers. This, of course, should not be considered as a direct allusion to present events, but nonetheless, it's helpful to remember how a parliamentary majority can shatter a democratic regime. I do not intend to discuss the judicial reform as such, which is being analyzed on every possible occasion, rightly so, of course, and from every possible angle. Instead, I would like to point to what I consider as the core of Israeli society's predicament, the Palestinian issue. It is at the center of our conundrum, of our political sickness, of our long-term social malaise. The settlers' riots in Hawara, or as it's rightly called, the pogrom in Hawara, are a perfect illustration. For practical reasons, the Palestinian issue is being pushed aside by the center-left in order to allow the more right-wing oriented demonstrators to participate in the fight against judicial reform. For their own reasons, the Palestinians themselves are abstaining from participation. For both them and us, it's wrong and it's a mistake. At this moment of truth, tactical considerations should not stand in the way of basic moral principles, and mainly for those who do not want to hear of moral principles. Such considerations should not hide catastrophic practical consequences. I do not know whether the conflict with the Palestinians may still find a peaceful solution. Nobody knows. Maybe it never could from the very beginning of. But there is no doubt that the continuing domination of the occupied territories and the constant expansion of settlements fans flames of conflict. And the frequent brutality of our operations in the territories not only exacerbates Palestinian violence, but increasingly brutalizes our own society. Not all of us are ready to recognize that the fight for democracy is inseparable from the need and full equal rights, or let's say full equal status to Arabs and Jews in Israel, and putting an end to the domination over some 2 million of Palestinians in the territories beyond our borders. But in my opinion, it is so. The relation between the Palestinian issue and the present crisis is obvious. If the judicial overhaul is voted upon, a Knesset majority will be capable not only of cleansing Netanyahu and Deri of all wrongdoings, but mainly of deciding over the annexation of the West Bank. I know that this is not said aloud these days, that this seems to have been forgotten out of fear of international, particularly American reaction. But didn't the Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh decisions mention a moratorium of only a few months? Do you think that these few months will have elapsed? Ben-Gvir and Smotrich will let go? As all nationalist religious zealots, they will never abandon their major goal. Once this happens, there will be many more Elon Morel, to paraphrase Menachem Begin, but also many more Hawara, and why not many more Dir Yassin. And all at once, Israel as everybody here knows it and loves it, will have disappeared to be replaced by an authentic and criminal apartheid state. All this looks dreary, and our democracy clock seems close to midnight. But in fact, all polls show that more than population is against reform, and probably is increasingly spreading, is the most powerful democratic way of influencing the course of politics. And thank God that the idea is spreading. Such resolve of some of the best among us should give hope to all and restore our confidence in the coming of better days. Some of you may have seen in a recent article in Haaretz a quote from Victor Klemperer's diary, written shortly after the Nazis came to power. And I quote, "Naked violence and horrible hypocrisy find their expression in official ordinances. Nobody breathes freely anymore. More than fear, I feel shame. For the first time, I feel political hatred against the whole group." And Klemperer added, "Deadly hatred, words that I hope we will never have to use here." Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Friedländer, and I'm sorry again for the communication mishap there. Thank you all. This concludes the conference today. I hope you enjoyed it and it was thought-provoking. And hopefully we'll see you at the 100th celebration of Saul Friedländer's special issue.